A very good evening to you and welcome to Politics 101, our midweek edition. I want to welcome everyone to our program. This is the month of February. It is Black History Month, and last evening we kicked off our Black History programming with the chairman of the Guyana Reparations Committee on discussing reparations, and I was on Buxtonian Morning Time this morning, and those who were here last night were asking for a repeat of that program. It seems to have touched a spot, and we would repeat it. I can't give you a time right now, but we certainly would repeat that show. We, of course, have said that Black history is an important phenomenon in the history of Guyana, the wider Caribbean, and Africa and its diaspora. We believe that although Black History Month is officially observed in the United States of America and Canada and the United Kingdom, that it is important for us in Guyana and the rest of the Caribbean to also observe Black history. We have a similar history of bondage, although there are others in our society, our country, who would tell us the Black American problem is not a Black Guyanese problem. My column this past weekend made the case for Black History Month to be observed in Guyana, and somebody replied to it in this morning's paper to say that Dr. Hines started well, but then he degenerated. And I was wondering what the person meant by degenerating, and it soon became clear that I degenerated, quote unquote, when I sought to talk about Black history within the context of Guyana. The person was quite happy for me to say Black History Month was started in America, Carter G. Woodson, and all of that stuff. But once I began to talk about Black history within the context of Guyana, I quote unquote degenerated. And the person went on to talk about the Black experience in America, because that's what he wanted me to talk about. And I rather suspect that that person is not singular, that part of our problem in Guyana and the rest of the world is that we are denied, as Africans, we are denied the space to speak frankly, without looking over our shoulders, about the Black experience from the Middle Passage onwards and even before the Middle Passage. The problem has to do with the fact that if you are going to talk about the experience in the Americas since the Middle Passage, central to that experience is the Black experience. And in the context of ethnic competition, that is read as a monopolizing of the historical space of the region. We have not matured yet to the point where, as a society, we can listen to the experience of one another, to the experience of sister groups and brother groups, without feeling that somehow or the other we are being indicted. That if we talk about Black history, we are really indicting Chinese and Portuguese and Indians and Amerindians. It's a very warped and obscene way of seeing human experience. But that is what our Guyana has become. that we can discuss race, we can discuss slavery and colonialism, so long as they have to do with other places, not our Guyana. Any attempt to do so, one is asked, what about the other races? And the truth of the matter is that human history doesn't work like that. It hasn't evolved like that. African people were the only people who were brought to these shores in chains. Other groups came. Other groups were dumb-pressed and subjected to oppression. But what separates the experience is the singular experience of enslavement and the consequences of enslavement. That is what makes the African experience unique. And that uniqueness has an impact on the entire landscape. The objective of enslavement was the creation of European wealth. And in the process of doing so, the African was dehumanized. People who have not been humanized, it's very difficult to understand what it means to be dehumanized and what it means to be the sons and the daughters, the offsprings, those who were in the arena of the dehumanization. People seem to think that if you were born a century later, that you escaped that dehumanization, or so they want it to be, but that is absolutely not so. Bondage as a way of reproducing itself even when people are formally free. That the end of a formal system does not mean the end of the experience of that system. It does not mean the end of the experience of that system, the social relations. The very fact that we have to make the case for Black history to be part of current history, and that understanding Black history makes it easier for us to understand the Guyana that we live in today, the Barbados, the Jamaica, the Haiti, Brazil, as the case may be. It is very difficult in a situation of ethnic competition, where the ethnic groups compete for everything, including cultural space. And so our appreciation and understanding of the centrality of African history, first of all, to the African. The little boy shot down, S-H-O-T, shot down on the streets by the police routinely. The young girl is seen as nothing more than a sexual object. The health issues that are prevalent in the Black community, those things are sometimes discussed in a presentist way. That these are things that are happening those days. But those things are the consequence of the experience of bondage. The way in which the African was seen as naked, bereft of identity, bereft of humanity. And so therefore, the inhumane treatment of today is a direct and indirect consequence of that experience. Brother Bob Marley says, no chains on my feet, but still I'm not free. Or he asks of those who would like to distribute current wealth in an inhumane way, in an unequal way. He asks, didn't my people before me slave for this country? I built a cabin, I planted the corn. Didn't my people before me slave for this country? Now you look me in the face and you want to eat out all my corn. Very graphic example of what I'm trying to talk about. That the inequities in our society today and the issue of the distribution and redistribution of wealth are grounded in that history of denial of the economic identity of our people, working without pay, not for a week, not for a month, not for a year, but for generations. Not because there was a recession. It was not unemployment. It was a denial of the right to life. Because of a denial of the right to earn is a denial of the right to life. So when you look at African Guyanese unemployment, underemployment today, yes, it partly has to do with the economic motions of the society today, but it is structurally part of our landscape. That is, we live in countries where the institutions are more accommodating to Black denial, Black unemployment than the unemployment of other groups. Those are facts. Facts that our society prevents us from speaking to in a non-interfering way. Somebody's always interfering with our discourse. Indentureship was as hard as slavery. And what about the Chinese? What about the East Indians? Always trying to water down the discourse on the African condition. And we Africans are often complicit in it. In the sense that we feel that we, in order to be our brothers and our sisters, friends and neighbors, we have to give up part of our humanity. Because so long as we do not solve and come to grips with the African condition in Guyana, in St. Lucia, in Grenada, wherever, we're never going to come to grips with the problems we face. I'm submitting that with all the oil we afford, we are not going to become a developed country unless we deal with the question of the systematic and institutionalized underdevelopment of the African. Because the basis of our underdevelopment is the underdevelopment that was created during the period of slavery, when some of our brothers and sisters were not even on this shore, these shores. Our own Walter Rodney, in his classic text, which 50 years today since he wrote How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, has become the Bible whenever one studies the relationship between development and underdevelopment. And those who feel that we can have development without addressing this is all underdevelopment, they're preaching a lie. That speech by Haile Selassie to the United Nations, which was turned into by Bob Marley until the ignoble, unhappy regime that all our brothers and sisters in South Africa until justice of man to man, until that is solved, the world shall know no peace. Arguing, Karl Marx argued that the basis of the inequities in the world has to do with social class. The basis, the source. And Bob Marley, through the words of Selassie, is arguing that racial inequity, racism, is at the base of the turbulence in the world. And we Africans, we live that every day. So we do. We've got to eat, we've got to drink, we've got to sleep. We've got to do things that human beings do. Because of our unique experience, we've got to do more. We've got to say, I am beautiful. Only group that has that burden. We've got to say, get up, stand up for your rights. Only group that has. We have to ask, where is the Black God? Only group with that burden. Our Rastafarian brothers as that. Erlang, what is African to me? Our own Martin Carter saying, I got the nigger yard of yesterday, living from the oppressor's hate and the scorn of myself. I turn to the history, our poetry, our music, our dance, having to make that plea for identity and humanity, only group. And the reason for that is that sordid experience of enslavement. And we have got to claim the space to talk about that experience so that we can feel free again. Our depression in Guyana is not solely because of the PPP. Yes, the PPP is the modern manifestation of the plantation. But we have to see our denial as deeper than that. If we get caught up and believe that our oppression has to do with two parties fighting each other, we're missing the mark. And perhaps that's what they want us to do, to confine our narratives of suffering to a present phenomenon. The present is the manifestation of a long, wide, cruel past. Every time I hear the crack of the whip, my blood runs cold. Slave driver, the tables are turned now. Bob Marley giving us some hope. If the tables are going to be turned from slave drivers to our brothers and sisters, that burden is ours. And we Black people can only carry our burden and unburden ourselves of that negative burden if we recognize our condition, the state of the African Guyanese. What is the state of the African? I'm not trying here to say that we have not done, it's a minor or a major miracle that despite our oppression, we have made our equal contribution to this world. Equal contribution. We have contributed to world civilization. Our experience is at the base of the Caribbean civilization. We have given the world dance, the spoken word, music. David Rudder said, we've given the world music. to make the politicians cringe. And that music comes from deep within our Caribbean belly. So we have to, this February, like all Februaries before and going forward, we have to take up that mantle. And the best place to do that is when we are communing, you know, and Bob Marley talks about, remember when we used to sit around the fire? When Georgie would share cornmeal porridge, of which I share with you. The culture of sharing, that's what we're doing here. And we come here in the evenings, tell all kinds of foolish story. Oh, these boys, they're there, they're preaching hate and so on. No, we are sitting around the fire with our cornmeal porridge, and we are sharing as we're doing tonight. And tonight we want to share the condition of the African Guyanese. You know, we've got to take stock of where we are. Because when we take stock of where we are, we have a clear sense of where we have to go. We're in the middle of a decade that has been set aside by the United Nations. And the basis of that decade is that there is something about the African condition that the world, as uncomfortable as it is, the world has to contend with. Not a minute, not a day, not a month, a decade. And it wasn't given by Nigeria and Haiti and Barbados, by the United Nations. There is an admission of guilt or an admission of wrong that must be corrected. It's an admission that we Africans must embrace. If others are saying that your experience demands treatment today, don't tell them they're wrong. And our government under the coalition was conscious enough to sign on to the International Decade of the People of African Descent. Not because it was an African-dominated government, because there are African-dominated governments that don't want anything to do with blackness. I argue that they did that because that government was conscious of the importance of observing that decade. And so it's an official observation, official observances in Guyana. And we give thanks to that. We give thanks to that. What it says is that our cries and our pleas have been heard by those on the mountaintop. And they're recognizing that, and we have our role to play. And so from 2016, IPADA-G, as they've come to be known, a coalition of Black organizations have been functioning, and they're best placed, I think, to give us a sense of what's happening in the African Guyanese community. We're in a plural society. We will always have the macro view. What's happening in Guyana, what's happening in the Guyanese economy. But not always we can glean from that what's happening in the African Guyanese economy. What's happening in the African Guyanese household? We know that we are experiencing tremendous economic woes in Guyana. Is that experience in the African Guyanese community? Poverty is universal, but even poverty is unevenly experienced. And so I've asked tonight the chairman of IPADA-G and the CEO to come on tonight. Brother Vincent Alexander, who is on quite often because, you know, in the tradition of the African wise man. He plays several roles, wears several hats. It's one of the things that my students are always remarking on. Dr. Hines, you teach in politics, but you've gone into poetry and music and dance, you know? And I have to explain to them that given our own experience, we've had to develop multiple ways and multiple simultaneous responses. If you come to me so gone so, you know, Teacher George said, we're Guinea board all, not the yale, me the all you want me head, but I gone so with the head. So we've had to multitask. The Americans call it code switching. And so Vincent is here quite often. Sister Olive Sampson, the CEO, the moving force behind IPADA-G, because you know when you're running these operations, you need somebody there to hold the thing together. You know, there was always that person in the village who held things together. It was often a woman in my experience. You know, the men were born in the Bagdam, and it was mommy or auntie or granny who held the household together, and you know, holding the household together, holding the street together, the neighborhood together, the village together. And Sister Olive has been playing that role. Of course, by the time she got to that role, she would have amassed tremendous experience as a manager, and so she's here. Not a regular face. I can tell you, it's a force to reckon with. Sister Olive and Brother Vincent, good night.
Good evening.
Good evening to you.
And I know I spent a long time going through doing my thing, but I'm sure that I've left enough time for you all to take center stage. And I can assure you, after now, I will shut up, except for answering questions. Let me start with you, Olive, because you don't get to face the new ball very often here. What is the significance of Black History Month to us African Guyanese in particular, and Guyana in general?
Can you repeat? I didn't hear a part of your question. Your voice dropped.
The significance of Black History Month to the African Guyanese community and the Guyanese community at large.
Oh, it's immeasurable. The fact that we have a month is something we need to correct, of course, because we ought to be dealing with our history year long, every day, because it is who we are. And it's the argument that we have to make that against our oppressors, what has happened to us, the legacy of our enslavement, but also our glorious past. Because remember, our history did not begin with slavery, and we have to be mindful to tell the story of our entire history while we work feverishly and tirelessly to correct the period of enslavement. So Black History Month is critical here in Guyana for African Guyanese and for all of Guyana, because all Guyanese benefit from the work that was done, the contributions that were made by people of African descent during the time of enslavement and then following that. The fact that we really are the reason, we are at the basis of our local government system. We are the ones who, having purchased plantations, created the first villages. There's so much that we've contributed. Every day that we pass a canal, every day that we benefit from our drainage system, we must be reminded of how that came to be there. How did that come to be there? And so I cannot argue more forcefully that not only should we consider Black History Month as sacred, but we must, in this period, struggle to ensure that history is taught every single day. And that is why for IPADA-G, one of our priorities is to ensure that Guyanese history, a history that encompasses the contributions of all and is honestly told, that that history is taught across our education system, and that we honor the days of the year that are important to people of African descent, that highlight the work that we have done. So I'd like to make the point that, for example, our places that ought to be enshrined, like Parade Ground, like the site of the Berbice slave revolution, now overgrown with forest. Those are important sites that we need to fight to have honored. They need to be honored and restored. And so, Black History Month, I don't want to say that we're grateful for it. I just want to say that we need to take advantage of it to fight for a recognition of our contribution, our long history, and to ensure that all Guyanese, and particularly African Guyanese, are aware.
Thank you very much, Vincent. You have been out there and trying to witness on the part of the racial equality in Guyana and beyond. And so you know firsthand the difficulty of talking and advocating for Black empowerment, Black history in a plural society. Elaborate on that, the challenge of advocating for racial empowerment in a plural society, an ethnically plural society.
You're quite right, David, that we live in a plural society. That in itself is not accepted by all. And when we talk about a plural society, we're talking about a society in which you have people who have different origins, different heritage, and consequentially, different cultures, even as we try to forge a Guyanese culture. And the problem that we have is that historically, people of African descent have not had the original formal institutions. You were deprived of those institutions through the process of enslavement. It is in those institutions that the interest of people of any descent, in this instance of African descent, are pursued. It is in those institutions that people are able to practice their culture and to recognize their heritage. In the absence of those institutions, you're literally silenced. And so during the period of enslavement, the people of African descent were literally silenced. Came emancipation, something that was fought for, and therefore brought with it a culture of struggle, which the plantation owners pushed back against. And therefore, as we sought to build institutions, that building of institutions coincided with the act of liberation, which was not in consonance with what the status quo and the state desired. And so, all along the way, there was this push back against the things we were doing in our own right. And one of the things that we were doing in our own right is seeking recognition as a people who are equally entitled in the society as any other group is. And so once you attempt to exercise that entitlement by seeking your recognition, articulating, in a sense, it is seen as that struggle which brought about and may continue to bring about change. It is seen as something other than what the status quo is. It is seen as something that ought to be suppressed because of the power it brings with it that may lead to change. And so that is the problem we are faced with as people of African descent. Started off being not recognized as human beings, having to struggle to get that recognition, and being considered as agents of change to the detriment of the status quo, and therefore our agency in some regards is taboo. And a part of that agency is for us to deal with the question of self-recognition on one hand, and recognition by the society at large. And you can only do that by asserting who you are, and in asserting who you are, demand the human rights that should befall any group of people. But once we do that, it is seen as the struggle of the black man against the status quo. It is seen as the black man attempting to climb a ladder which should otherwise be static and have him remain where he was and where he still is. It is seen as if you want to take away something from others. And it's particularly in that regard that others say, what you're doing is not right because what you're doing interferes with us insofar as it is taken away. It represents the absence of an understanding of our history. It represents the non-appreciation of the need for equity. If we are to exercise our human rights as equal human beings, you can't exercise a human right as an equal human being if you are disadvantaged. And when we talk about our blackness, when we talk about the redress for our blackness, we are talking about being disadvantaged and how we overcome that. And obviously that will require space that we do not presently occupy. There are those who occupy that space historically to our disadvantage and would like to retain that occupation, and in their own interests seek always to ensure that we do not get that space which rightfully belongs to us. In a circumstance where there is sufficient space for all, if we are to allow the entire landscape to be explored and enjoyed. But there seems to be a preservation of the landscape for their future enjoyment and a curtailment of us enjoying the rights, because if you lock off that landscape and you restrict movement to the space that we presently occupy, then you're interfering with them. When in fact, the landscape should be explored, and in an equitable manner, we should be given an opportunity to assert ourselves on that landscape. So that people of African descent are seen as looking after themselves in a world where there's a lot of language that says, well, really, you shouldn't be uh, doing that to the apparent disadvantage of others. What equity suggests that you are disadvantaged. And in the context of being disadvantaged, you should be given, in the first instance, an unequal opportunity to realize your being and your equality, the purpose of then equal access and equal involvement. But you can't have equal access and you can't have equal involvement if you suffered inequity and if equity is not realized for the equalization which we're entitled to as human beings.
Equity and equalization, very powerful point being made there, that one cannot operate in a condition of equity if that equity does not exist. And equity is important insofar as mutual respect is concerned, insofar as all groups are going to progress in the society. The CEO of IPADA-G, Ms. Olive Sampson, give our audience a kind of profile of IPADA-G. How did it get started? What's your mandate, etc., etc.
Thank you, David. IPADA-G comes out of, as you said, the United Nations declared decade to address the challenges being faced by people of African descent globally. And minor correction to your earlier point, it was actually signed in December 23 by the then PPP administration, 2013, sorry. But what did not happen in the year between the signature, December 2013, and the start of the decade, January 2015, there was no plan in place. There was no plan in place for how this decade would be rolled out. What the APNO AFC government did in coming into office was to look at this opportunity and take advantage of it and to reach out to African Guyanese organizations to declare let us work together on taking advantage of this decade and to put something in place. IPADA-G is our direction is forged by first a strategic plan. We went across the country, met with people in their communities, and came up with here are the issues that confront us, here are the things that ought to be your priorities. So we focus on economics, education, employment, and issues of equity and expiation that Vincent was just talking about. We try to empower our community. Government gives us a subvention. It is by no means large enough to deal with all of the issues that our community confronts. But we try through this subvention and through the secretariat, the committees, our coordinating council, to put together a series of programs that would empower our people. So for example, we offer training programs. Last year, we trained 77 small contractors so that they can then be well equipped to bid for opportunities in this burgeoning new economy. And so we're going to continue that this year. We have offered opportunities for small businesses to understand record keeping, to understand how to submit proposals, etc. Similarly, for organizations, working with small farmers on their issues. One great example of what we've done, even in the midst of COVID, is the Mocha Market Day. Mocha Arcadia Market Day, we worked with that co-op, and they started with one market day in December of 2020, and over time have now developed into monthly market days with plans progressing to make that a more frequent market, as now that local farmers have a place, people go there and it's well recognized. Similarly, we are working with other communities to do the same kind of thing so that our farmers have an opportunity to sell their produce, agro processors and other producers in communities have local spaces in which to produce. We have a very vibrant youth committee. Our youth conference is going to be coming up again in March. We have a youth conference annually. The youth conference brings young people, young African Guyanese together to A, learn about our history, and B, we focus on areas of interest to the youth. Entrepreneurship is a critical area. And so last year, we launched our annual Investathon, an opportunity for young people to develop business ideas, to be mentored by successful African Guyanese business persons, to receive an award through IPADA-G for something that they need for their business. And we don't just give them a check. We make sure that they come in and work with us so that the whatever the award is that they receive really takes their business further along with the guidance and support of both the mentors and with the IPADA-G Economic Committee and staff. And so our work is that of empowerment, facilitating the training and support for African Guyanese business persons, small business people, and our organizations, trying to build a strong network of organizations. When we started in 2018, because that's when we received our first subvention in 2018, there were 31 member organizations within the network that creates IPADA-G, our General Assembly. We now have 65 member organizations scattered across Guyana. We want to make sure that that is a strong network, that that all of the member organizations are familiar with each other, understand their work, and that there is synergy, that there's a way in which this network can support our communities. We encourage other organizations to join the network so that together we can make sure that at the end of the decade, we really have done our very best to achieve the goals of the decade, which are recognition, justice, and development. A lot of our work, because of COVID-19, can be seen on our Facebook page. We encourage people to follow us on Facebook. Even on Facebook, we try to provide a service. For example, on Tuesdays, we call it Opportunity Tuesdays. I encourage people who are job hunting or looking for opportunities to submit bids for contracts. All of those things we carry on our Facebook page every single Tuesday. And it's quite popular, and I encourage more people to use it so that we can be familiar with what is out there, what is being offered. So many times we don't get the newspapers, we don't have access, but on our Facebook page, you can find out what is going on. Similarly, we have, from various events where we have put a spotlight on our small businesses, we, on our Facebook page on Friday and Saturday, highlight businesses. So if you're looking for, I'm asking your audience, if you're looking to purchase anything or any service, check our Facebook page out first and see what African Guyanese business you might be able to support, right? We want to make sure that our dollars circulate within our community a few times before they leave. It's very important to build our community that way. We're not trying to deny others, but we're simply trying to say that is a way in which our economy, this ecosystem of the African Guyanese community, can be stronger. And so we support business, we support the organizational development, we work closely with youth. In working with youth, we are, for example, right now supporting night schools for vulnerable youth in our community. We are supporting 2 night schools, one in Region 6, one here in Region 4, and looking to see how else we can provide support for vulnerable youth who, given a chance, can turn their lives around. We're also working with young people who are trying to develop their own businesses, providing them with mentorship and training in business development. We're about to start a class with 30 young people who will go through a 6-week training program, developing business plans, and then be mentored through that. So I've gone on a bit, David, but that's kind of a broad overview of the kinds of things that we're doing in this decade. But history is a part of all of it.
Vincent, anything you would like to add there?
Would like to add the state that we are in is not unrelated to the state because the state sets the framework for within which all Guyanese operate. And much of what has happened is that the state coming out of enslavement in many regards has not changed. And so the status quo, the policies, the dispositions towards people of African descent in many regards, given the state institutions and their origin and their continuity, has remained the same. So that separate and apart from working among ourselves, we also have to be involved in serious advocacy in relation to the state for them to put in place policies in the first instance that can be a framework within which we can pursue the themes of the decade: recognition, justice, and development. And in the context of equity, which I talked about earlier, we also have to impress upon the state that resources and opportunities and in the form of projects are put at our disposal so that we can overcome the inequity which inheres in the Ghanaian society because of where we came from and the absence of the changes required to give us, quote unquote, a break. So that apart from working with and among ourselves, we also have to play a significant role in terms of interacting with the state, advocating and proposing policies. So, for example, we have already concluded that one of the things we wish to see is a return of village councils so that in those enclaves where people of African descent purchased land and created their communities, that they have ultimate control for the things that are peculiar to those communities so that they can do things for themselves using the resources in those communities. It's not necessarily the case right now, because right now the villages are consumed in local authorities that allows for decision making about things that are peculiarly the property of the people of African descent to be done by other people and not necessarily in the interest of the people of African descent. So we would like village councils to be reinstated with specific responsibility for the lands, the ancestral lands, so that those lands which were literally purchased by people of African descent that may have morphed into communal lands and therefore under some kind of state, local, or a central control, continues to be or is returned to the control of the people of African descent, because for all intents and purposes, those lands are originally private property acquired by the hard work of our ancestors, and we have every right to be the inheritors of the property, the controllers and the utilizers of this property for the benefit of our growth and our development to the detriment of no one else. It's our property. So there are policies like those which we have to advocate for. We have to advocate for policies in the arena of employment, for example. There are serious issues in the arena of employment. We live in a state where our legal system provides for what, in effect, is dismissal at pleasure. You know, when we wanted a republic and the queen was sovereign, there was something called dismissal at the pleasure of the queen or the king. We've abolished that. But by virtue of the kind of contracts which we have, where people can simply be terminated because the employer decides he or she, he, she, or the state no longer wants to employ someone without cause. And so they could have cause in their head and dismiss you, terminate you without cause. And this is peculiar to the state sector in some regards, a sector which is one of our largest employers, a sector which is populated for historical reasons, and I emphasize that, by people of African descent. There is this machinery, this mechanism for arbitrary termination, which I think equates to dismissal at the pleasure, in this instance of the state, coming down from the history of the dismissal at the pleasure of the crown, of the queen. So we have to argue for policy changes, for paradigm shifts in those things. If we, as people of African descent, are to be given a fair chance, to be given justice, another theme of the decade, to be given justice as we seek to be meaningful citizens in this the cooperative republic. And republic means that it's the people who are sovereign. The government is not sovereign. The people who are sovereign. And therefore, the people should be, in the final analysis, the ones who are determining what happens. And in that regard, the question of the people being able to have a say and a voice demands a certain kind of democracy and an electoral system that enables that democracy. We don't necessarily have that right now. We have a majoritarian system in a plural society where it is possible for one group to impose its will on the other group. And therefore, the idea of the republic being sovereign, not being realized, because sovereignty is virtually exercised by one group of people in between elections as the society at large tries to exercise it at election time. So those are things that we have to endeavor to bring about. The decade has been declared because the world, through the United Nations, under the urging of the Pan-African movement, conferences like the conference held in South Africa, have called for a recognition of the state of people of African descent, and as a consequence, the need for them to be given recognition, justice, and ultimately, development which is all encompassing. Development encompasses recognition, encompasses justice, it encompasses the enhancement of the lives of people. The world has recognized the need for that. And therefore, here in Guyana, it's not just a matter of IPADA-G or a matter of the African community. It's also a matter of the state recognizing that the world has said there is need for these things and that some of these things cannot and will not be recognized. We realize without the involvement of the state, which sets the scene for people's involvement in the exercise of their sovereignty.
the exercise of sovereignty, and Vincent Alexander there of IPADA-G, along with Olive Sampson, the CEO. People are asking for that website. I'll ask the operator to put it up, if you can enlarge it a little so that people can go on Facebook and find it. It's quite informative, the International Decade of the People of African Descent Assembly Guyana. It's there on Facebook. You can find it and the information that's there. We are going to take a short break, a short musical break. And when we come back, I want us to talk a little bit more about the entrepreneurial intervention. That has always been an area of the Black experience that is often misunderstood, is often controversial. But we're going to talk about IPADA-G's intervention at the level of entrepreneurship. Why, what is happening, and what's the objective? We take a short break.
They don't like people to say, they don't like me to say they're nice. They know they want all of them to say they're nice. What else say they're nice? Yeah. All of it better, yeah? Good thing going, man. Roy and the whole side. Nice thing. Are we going to the next little thing, Rise. Yeah. Rise, African rise. Change your plan, Africa. Since emancipation we dominated, it's cocktail hard work, African hated. We just passed 1991. Before you pull up the cup, you're pulling it down. I perform a post-mortem through San Fernando. Indian people controlling all the dough. Check it out, it's still king. I walk down my street, this is what I see. Indian people controlling all the money. Solomon Ghani. Money. Well, my head is too, so I'm feeling shame. It's time for me to join the guns again. I don't want to always walk hanging my head down. African, it's time to turn the knob on. I tell you to rise, African rise. It's time we open we eyes. I want you to raise, something to raise. You want to see that justice? I'm begging your cry. The headline. The Indians leaving way behind. I beg you to change all that nonsense. I want all Africans to wake up. African in this land, we heading for destruction. You want Babula, don't Caracal, come up on the same Kurial. But African drink rum and wine in panorama. But you put aside a little something they for later. The Indian man didn't drink so much rum, so he hide away a little money there for his son. We used to laugh and say how Indians felt so flat. For me, you know where go on now. Money push out that when full man you walk. I myself just talk. This may sound like joke, but the serious thing. Fried chicken and pudding, and them like dumpling. African like roti, and running down, sit down. Alcari. Long time in toilet was bottle of water. Now they have changed this still in latching with newspaper. African rats in the head and acting like fish. African face they tread Indian face they rich. I want it to rise, African rise. It's time we open the eyes. I want you to raise, my people raise. If you want to see better days, I beg in your cry, in their time. The Indians leaving way behind. I beg you to change for them now.
The mighty crow there, rise African rise. Some self-criticism there about the attitude of our African people towards entrepreneurship and money making. As is the case in these matters, we compare ourselves with the opposite group. A frank self-critique there by mighty Crow. Let me bring you in, Olive, because IPADA-G has spent a lot of its effort on the question of entrepreneurship. Why and what have you been doing that has been potentially making a difference?
Great question, David. Thank you. We have spent a lot of time on training and supporting a business because first of all, there are many African Guyanese, for whatever reason, often because of lack of other opportunities, or because the employment space is not always fairly contested. So we find that many of our people look for entrepreneurial opportunities, micro businesses, small businesses, and we work with people to help them to develop, to register their businesses, and so that those businesses can grow. Many people enter business without the necessary background in having either worked with, they're not necessarily inheriting a business, they're starting a business, they don't know how, but they are determined and resilient in a highly competitive space. So we provide training. We try to help people understand the importance of registering the business name, getting registered with GRA compliance, developing record-keeping skills so they can determine whether the business is making money, how to make the business make money, and putting together the kind of portfolio that will then can allow the business to grow further, so that with that information, they can potentially seek to approach a bank for a loan or find ways of joining partnerships with other businesses. So our training programs, I mentioned earlier, we've trained people who are already in business and are looking to be able to bid for contracts. How do you do that? What do you have to have in place and how do you go through that process successfully? In addition to that, we have provided opportunities for businesses to actually market. Most recently, in December, we had a marketplace at the Square of the Revolution where we shone a spotlight on soft furnishings, things that people would normally look to buy at Christmas time, cushions and drapes and other things, but also other producers, craft producers and agro processors. And we are going to continue to do that. We will be doing this marketplace again this year, at least twice this year. We'll be doing that market. We'll be doing the marketplace. But one of the things that we really try to drive home to our business people is that Africans and African Guyanese have always been involved in business. We have been we are business people. The notion that African Guyanese are not, or Africans in general, are not successful in business is a part of the propaganda, a part of the brainwashing that encourages us to stay away from that sphere. So we try to ensure that we help people understand how we got to a place where people say that about us. How the systemic racism that put in place licensing laws that really prohibited us from operating some businesses, and the kind of taxes that prevented us from really being successful. Imagine, as I understand it, when way back when, and people who had a dray cart had to have a license, or the limitation on selling directly, where you had some races, and I think mostly Portuguese and Chinese, given the opportunity to set up stores and to sell in villages where we were denied those opportunities. And David, you can correct me if my recollection of the history is wrong in that case. But so we, having been disadvantaged and having, in many ways, having to fight to help our businesses survive in an environment where loans from banks are often denied us. We had a program on one of our online programs last year in which we had three very well-known business persons, one of them being Terence Campbell. And he admitted on our program that even he, a well-established, obviously very successful business person, finds it difficult to approach our commercial banks for loans, that his application for a loan is not treated in the same way as others, when he clearly is a business person who has managed well and whose businesses are successful. In recognition of the fact that access to credit is a problem for our people, IPADA-G has launched a credit union. The credit union was launched in 2020, and we encourage people to come and join the credit union. It is co-located with IPADA-G Secretariat at Lot 14 North Road, Border. We want you to join the credit union because we are trying to find ways in which our community can find a friendly financial service. And the IPADA-G Credit Union is certainly that. So business is critical. We work with youth. And again this year, I'd like your audience to look out for the advertisement of our Investathon. The Investathon, which will be annual and which we started last year, provides an opportunity for a young business person who has a business idea or who already has a business and is looking to expand it to present his or her business plan to a panel of judges, right? And those judges work with them to determine how viable their proposals are, what are some of the weaknesses and strengths, etc. And it's a competition. At the end of the competition, the winners, and last year we had actually 5 winners, receive a grant as part of their prize. It's a monetary prize to support a specific aspect of their business plan. And so that was very successful, and we have been advertising some of those businesses on our Facebook page, as I said before. So we support businesses through training, through access to our credit union, through this kind of competition, through a display of their work, marketing on our Facebook page, and through on-site sales event like we did in last December when we had our first market day at the Square of the Revolution, which I said we'll have at least twice again this year. So we hope that people will come out and support our businesses, and even would consider, if we have in the audience people who are producers of items, to join that, so that we can have as large a representation of our community as possible.
Just only for a couple of things. One, give us a phone number that people can get IPADA-G, and for the operator to put it across the screen. That's one.
Okay.
If you can put it in the private chat, the operator will pick it up there.
I will.
Yeah. And the second thing, I want to invite IPADA-G that when you have these events, these daily, week events, please send us PSA so that we can run it on this program, because I'm getting from the comments here that people do not know that all this is happening in our community. And I would like to put this program at your disposal so that, events are happening weekly. Please send us PSA so we can advertise these events. The third thing is, how can someone who lives overseas and wants to join the credit union, what do they? Is there an online form to fill out? Fill us in on that.
We don't as yet have an online form, but we have sent our application form to people in the diaspora so that they can join. We are working on developing that website and the application. We have to be very careful, of course, because people are putting their very private information on that form. So we're working on that to get that up to. I'm sure that we know that this is a priority, and so the management committee is working on that to get it done, to ensure that happens. I want to just
go ahead. You go ahead, Olive. I was asking if people can WhatsApp the same number to contact somebody at IPADA-G if they want. Yeah.
I will put in here my number, so that, because I am on WhatsApp, the number that I have put, 223-8853, is our office number. I will put my number, 624-9910. I am on WhatsApp, and I'm happy to take, to answer questions, and then to direct anyone to the credit union or to a staff person to be of assistance.
Okay.
In that. We are located.
I was telling the operator to please put that number up there. Tell us a little bit more about the Mocha Market Day, and if there are similar interventions. What happens there? How often it's there? What, somebody living in Diamond or Sterling or Providence, can they go to this market day at Mocha?
Yeah, the Mocha Market Day is monthly. It's currently a monthly market day, and we always advertise it on our Facebook page. I want to say that it is the third Sunday of the month, but don't hold me to that. But it is advertised on our Facebook page at all times. And so I encourage people to go to IPADA-G on Facebook, and we will advertise Mocha Market Day. We are working with 2 other locations, in fact, and there's a third that's upcoming. I don't want to put out the names too far in advance, because people might go thinking that they're ready to do it immediately, and they're not. We're working on them. They'll be coming on stream, hopefully a couple of them this year. But this is what we really want to encourage people to do.
Tell us what happens on the market day.
On market day, local producers, local farmers bring out their produce, local agro processors. I have a new place where I buy pepper sauce now from Mocha. I buy it from Big Tree. Big Tree is the name of the company. They put out the best pepper sauce that I've had recently. They have the best ice cream, I think, in Region 4. Now, I know, David, there's a great ice cream in Buxton, but there's a great ice cream also. at Mocha, and I would encourage people to go there. They also put people who make candles and other kinds of household furnishings have their stuff. So fresh greens, fresh ground provision. They make a great chicken ham and sell it at Mocha Mart. So people from the Mocha Mart Arcadia area produce their products that they're selling there. And they're conscious. These are conscious people who I think we don't have to worry about food that's coming to, fresh vegetables are coming to the market that were only recently sprayed with pesticide. Sometimes people worry about that. I think they're conscious that that's not something that they would do. Um, they are a wide variety and very good produce.
So yes, please send us the advertisement for that market day so that we can link people to go there to patronize that market there in Mocha Arcadia, one of our traditional ancestral villages there on the east bank of Demerara. I was fortunate to spend a couple of days there during the Christmas holidays, and young people there are very turned on to what's happening in the Black communities across the country. So please send us that advertisement. So and something, and also the credit union, because people are expressing interest in those things. Let's bring in Vincent. He's been quiet recently as we come down to program time. Vincent, are you encouraged as IPADA goes around and try to do a lot of this heavy lifting? For example, I know that a lot of African Guyanese were bypassed during the flood relief um, uh, 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 distribution, and that IPADA-G intervened in that and was able to ensure that African Guyanese in communities benefited from the flood relief. Talk a little bit about that and the larger question of how you think that IPADA-G is making a difference on the ground.
David, I want to first of all make a little additional comment on the market day.
Okay.
The Mocha Market Day is a model that we have developed that we hope to share with other places. And as Miss Sampson said, we already have some other places where we would have this implemented. What I want to say is this: the market day provides an opportunity for producers to sell their produce. But it is not just that. We have linked producers with training institutions so that, for example, people who rear chickens would have learned how to make ham from chickens and therefore are involved in value added products. And so it's not just a market day, it is a developmental exercise that allows people to be involved in acquiring skills that facilitates the production of goods that they can then bring to the market day as much as they have them for sale on other occasions. So it is the farming, it is the manufacturing, it is the packaging, it is the selling. All of those things are encompassed in what we do. Of concern to us in Mocha Arcadia and in other places is the fact that the inequity we talked about, where the farmlands are subjected to flooding, and the need for the state intervention to mitigate and or alleviate those farmlands of the flooding. some of the problems in Mocha Arcadia in terms of the farmlands have to do with other infrastructural development in the area. And so the state has to take responsibility and to go in and to mitigate and alleviate that flooding so people can get to work in producing, and they do want to produce. But that's a problem. As you said, when we formed the IPADA-G, we formed something called a compact, in which we said that as a collective, we would intervene wherever there are issues facing the African Guyanese community. We recognized during the flood relief process that for whatever reason, some communities were not being serviced, for whatever reason. And we decided that we were going to go in and do a survey and an enumeration of those people who were not being serviced. And we approached the Ministry of Agriculture and said to them, this has happened. We're not in the business of casting blame, we're in the business of identifying problems. This has happened, and we're in the business of finding solutions. And since it was the state that was providing the flood relief, we said, we are going to do the work, identify the people who have not been serviced, and we will bring that information to your attention for them to be serviced. And so we did that across the coast and in Linden. To the extent that when they had the parliamentary debate, the minister was waving a letter in the parliament to suggest that we had extended our appreciation for what he had done. Unfortunately, he didn't wave the first letter, which was the one saying what we would do. The second letter said, well, you have responded and therefore we're thankful. But the first one was the initiating letter. So we did that. IPADA-G is faced with some difficulties because the state of African Guyanese people has caused them to want immediate solutions. And so a lot of people have this anticipation and hope that IPADA-G is literally a grant organization. They can come to us and they can get grants. It is not a grant organization. We have, where possible, given material and financial assistance to some communities. We have done that. But we are not a grant organization. With $100 million, we're really in no position to do any big granting. Given the fact that we have a secretariat which is service-oriented, and therefore much of a significant part of our subvention is spent on the upkeep of the secretariat because we are largely a service-oriented body. We give service. You want to have a market day, we give you service. You want to have a training session for contractors, we give service. You want to help with developing a plan to go and approach a loan agency, we give service. And we intend to work with people like those to be able to go out to the places that are in fact the grant agencies or the loan agencies, so that they could in fact get access to the capital that they're looking for, which we cannot necessarily provide. And I want African Guyanese to understand that aspect of the work of IPADA-G. We have membership, and our membership comprises of organizations. But the idea is that these organizations have come together to provide a basis for service to the community. And so the organizations are a part of committees and things like that, where we ventilate and where we come up with ideas, come up with programs, but these are intended to give service to the community, whether it's the Investor-Ton for the youths, whether it's the youth expo, because they also have an expo as well. What we are up to is a provision of services to across the community and an interaction with agencies which we think are poised to provide assistance, be it the state or otherwise. So, for example, in our early work, we work with basic needs to have people get access. And I can say to you, through basic needs, we had the training of 50 persons in an auto electrical program at GITC. We were the ones who initiated that. We're now working on a program for training in the maritime area for seafarers, so that we are seeking to provide opportunity. We are not ourselves the opportunity, except that we are the opportunity to provide opportunities. That's what we are seeking to do. And we are looking forward this year to be more decentralized in our operations, to have our project officers take responsibility for specific geographical areas, so we can take service to the people and we can help them, whatever we need to do with them, right there in their communities. And in that way, organizations too will be able to work with us in communities to deliver the service which we are geared to deliver. We recognize that in 10 years, we will not be able to overcome the deficits that people of African descent have suffered, but we want to set the stage, create the framework for that work to go on beyond the decade, including the question of what do we do beyond the decade to maintain a body such as IPADA-G to continue to give service and leadership to the quest for recognition, justice, and development.
And on that note, let me ask Olive for any closing thoughts, anything you would like to leave with the audience?
Just to let the audience know that we are located at Lot 14 North Road, Border. That is where the credit union is as well. It's a historic space, the home of former President Hoyt. We'd like them to come join our credit union. And as I said before, look at what we're doing. Follow us on Facebook. And for those who wish to volunteer their time to support our work, we are always looking for volunteers who would like to offer their skills and expertise to the work that we're doing.
Thank you very much, Sister Olive, and thanks to you, Vincent, as always. And I hope we're going to be able to bring you back soon to talk about some, in more depth, about some of these projects. There seems to be an excitement around the Moko Market Day, so that when you come back, we can get into more details about these projects. Thanks very much to you both. To the audience, good night. You are always very loyal, and without you, there is no program tomorrow night. Tomorrow night we come back. We are going to have the WPA's take on the budget. Professor Clive Thomas is going to be on that program we had to cancel last week. We are going to have it tomorrow night. I know there are some complaints that people did not know of tonight's program. I want to apologize for us not sending out the flyers and the advertisements as we usually do. We shall correct that. Thanks again for those of you who came onto the program, and for those who didn't get to come onto the program, we apologize. Good night.
Please help keep Politics 101 on social media and broadcast television. If you are in North America, please donate via Cash App or PayPal.
If you are in Guyana and the Caribbean and don't have access to Cash App and PayPal, email your pledge to dhines6106@aol.com and we will direct you how to get your donation to us. Thank you in advance for your donation.